Today's session is all about the most underrated process in planning. Your hosts today are going to be Jeffrey Porter. I am the Chief Marketing Officer here at StockIQ Technologies. Been in consulting and leadership and supply chain for 30 plus years, passionate about serving others, and thoroughly enjoy hiking, cycling, skiing. And I'm showing my dog today because as I introduce our next guest here, Tim Wise, pleasure to have you on board. His fish was bigger than mine during the last session. So, Tim, I'll let you provide an introduction.
Welcome, everyone. My name is Tim Wise. I've got a small consulting firm called Tight Lines Consulting and Coaching. I've been managing international supply chains for 25 plus years, mainly in the high-tech space, but really lots of initiatives to improve the financial and operational goals for various product lines and businesses. Started my career in finance, but migrated to the operations and supply chain side, and have kind of bounced between financial management roles and supply chain roles. And as you can see from the picture, I'm a fly fishing enthusiast, as is Jeffrey. And that was about 3 hours north of here on the North Platte, up outside of Casper. So that nice rainbow there.
Nice fish there, Tim.
Thank you.
Your fish is not as big as my dog, but it is bigger than the fish. All righty. So this is the second in a four-part series. We introduced the series, which has been recorded, and if you'd registered, it is available. If you haven't seen the first part, we'd be happy to send you that as well. Today, we're going to be talking about the planning process, demand planning, supply and inventory planning, and then financial planning. At the end of the session, we've got some time for some Q&A, and also going to be sharing kind of the key takeaways on this. So with that being said, what I'd like to do is just introduce Tim, and can you take us down through your planning horizons here?
Yeah, so this is the way I like to think about planning. There's various levels of planning that you can engage in, some more frequent, some more frequent than others, but mainly today, we're going to be talking about kind of the midterm planning process, which some of you may refer to as a sales and operations planning process. But really, as you get down lower in the short term, in the very short term, you're talking about scheduling activities more so than planning, more executing the plans as you realize your demand and, your supplier management and those capabilities. But I call it the most underrated process because historically organizations that have a consistent repeatable planning process, they tend to not be as surprised. That doesn't mean they don't get surprised in their business, but they tend to be not as surprised, less risk of not having product, and missing or having surprises in their financial and operational plans. So I really view it as a core competency in your supply chain and your business, that a lot of organizations like to focus on the short term, which is really great. I love shipping stuff and I love taking orders, and I love realizing revenue. But the reality of it is there tends to be a little more reactive and firefighting going on when I don't feel like when I don't see that underlying foundation of planning.
Tim, question for you.
Sure.
Sales and operations planning is a term that I think had been historically reserved for larger organizations and larger companies. A lot of the clients that we work with are in the mid-market, right? Small to mid-market. If you start thinking about monthly sales and operations planning, is it being adopted in those levels? What's been your experience? And can you kind of break down that sales and operations planning process for those people that may not have adopted it yet?
Yeah, so the sales and operations planning process is, the idea here is that you have an integrated cross-functional plan, right? So it's integrated in the sense of you have a demand plan. You have an operations inventory supply plan, and then ultimately you end up with a financial plan that has consistent assumptions and consistent demand assumptions, consistent supply assumptions, such that you have an expectation of what your financials would look like if that plan comes to fruition. So most of the mid-tier organizations I've seen, and even some, some very large organizations, this is probably more up the maturity scale of processes relative to how people are planning. Maybe they're just doing the replenishment planning as an example. I see a lot of what I would call, doing some replenishment planning and ordering products or ordering lower level materials, but it's really not very sophisticated, and it's not very detailed relative to what demand expectations you have on a given product or product category. As a result, they end up in either excess or short inventory positions, really because they're not evaluating demand on an ongoing basis. And they set a reorder point, or they have min-max levels on their inventory, which I'm not necessarily opposed to, but if that's all you're using, you're going to get, products. You have new products you're introducing, products are going end of life, demand changes over the product life cycle. So having those built into your demand plan and informing your supply and financial plans is kind of a best practice, although I would admit it's a little bit up in the maturity of processes. And frequently I don't see a very integrated sales and operations planning process in most of my clients. And the myth, or maybe the myth that a smaller company doesn't need it or shouldn't pursue that, I've also implemented it in very, very small companies under 10 million, and have had some really good results doing that because now they felt like they had a handle on their business, right? They felt like they were in control of their business, and they also knew what they could expect in future months. Whereas before they were just looking at what orders were coming in and looking at, inventory levels, and really not mitigating opportunities, but also not mitigating the risk they had in their business.
Great. Thank you for that. Really appreciate that. And I think during our last session, one of the things that you talked about planning is essentially bringing the future into the present and evaluating it. And we're going to be talking a lot more about that demand planning aspect of it. But,
Yep.
and I appreciate the concept that this is up the maturity scale. It's not out of reach for companies. It takes some discipline, it takes some process, and probably an overall orientation, understanding what the components are. That's our goal today, which is really to talk about what are the components of all of this, and which would be great. So we actually have a question here, Tim, that I think is probably pretty applicable for us right now as we're talking about this. So the question is, who should be driving the S&OP process? In your opinion, is it operations? Should it be driven by finance, and why?
Different organizations have handled it different ways. I think it's a collaboration first and foremost between sales, ops, and finance. I tend to migrate. My opinion is operations can drive it, okay, and then partner with sales and finance. There's a lot of data elements and assumptions and structure that need to be aligned between all three parties before you can actually get a really good plan. But I do think that operations, because they see kind of both ends of it, can be a strong leader. I think some of that also depends on the organization, the skill sets, the experience levels of people. And I've seen it run from a finance perspective. I've seen it run from an ops perspective. I have to be honest, I haven't seen it run from a pure sales leadership, but there certainly needs to be an owner. And I wouldn't make that joint ownership. I'd give someone a process owner, and then have that broken down with roles and responsibilities.
Great. Thank you, Tim. Yeah, great. And to your point, having a process owner is a big one. We've often seen in our clients that are executing these quite well, a sales and operations planning coordinator.
Yep.
And that coordinator is the one that's collaborating and assisting in the operations, the demand planning team, the sales, the finance. So I would wholeheartedly align with you on that as well. And that operations is seeing all aspects of this, right? We're reacting to what the sales team needs. We're also providing information to finance and getting blessings with respect to various scenarios that we're analyzing. So thank you for that.
Absolutely.
All righty. Okay, so I think what we're going to do, let's take this into the next step and let's talk about the demand plan. We've talked about a demand plan. I will share with you from my perspective, it's a starting point for any business. But Tim, can you walk us down through the demand plan, and then we're going to give you some examples of what this may look like.
We always say history is the best, one of the best predictors of future, right? And so I think the statistical analysis, statistical planning of a forecast based on history is an excellent starting point. It can detect seasonality if you have seasonality in your business. But these other areas, right, be it a marketing sales where, if you have some promotional activity going on, you've also got product management where maybe you have some product transitions or you're introducing some new products. And then, of course, if you have relationships with customers that are providing you some insight into how they're pulling through your product, how are sales out with their supply chain and their demand generation activities. All those are kind of inputs into coming up with what I like to call, an unconstrained shipment plan. Okay, this is the demand plan that you would expect to be put on your operations to actually have shipments for, right? It wouldn't be hedged for operational issues, right? We would, work that downstream in the S&OP process. So this is what you would consider your raw demand for your products.
And then oftentimes we think about a demand plan, and if I'm operating with a lead time of 90 days, what would be the purpose or reason for me going out 18 months and preparing a demand plan for 18 months?
It really depends on in some ways, what your business model is, right? Relative to, your suppliers. One of the reasons to go out past even 12 months is if you have suppliers and you have growth in your business and you have suppliers that have lead times, not just for what I would call normal replenishment, but if they've got to put in incremental capacity or they've got to add people or, equipment or, maybe they got to get a new warehouse, all suppliers are not created equal. And that's one of the reasons to go out and that far is to be able to communicate and have those conversations with your supply base. And also as a strategic sourcing is, as you grow and if you have growth, how are you going to support that growth? And can the players in your supply chain support it? It could be not just suppliers, it could be logistics, it could be other areas as well. That's one of the key reasons to do it. Also just internally, right? If you have some growth opportunities and you have your own internal operations, you need to size to ensure that you can meet that. And some of those lead times are a lot longer than just, 60, 90-day normal lead time from a supplier.
Absolutely. Yeah, great planning. So again, we're kind of in that planning phase. On that previous slide, you talked about kind of that medium term to long term, and we're starting to get into looking at the long term and beginning preparing for that with against that advanced lead time. A little bit around this overall demand planning. Can you give me a sense on what you find optimal? Is it optimal to review these weekly? Is it monthly? Is it less frequently? What is kind of the cadence of this overall creation of a demand plan, and what have you found most effective?
I think I like a monthly cadence of, in monthly buckets of demand. I would say that different businesses, I don't know that doing this on a week to week basis is as beneficial. It's very hard sometimes to respond on a week to week basis. That doesn't mean you don't get orders that you need to respond to. But I think when I think about a month cycle, at least you get new month's worth of data to evaluate your previous forecast. You can make any adjustments, update that forecast. You may not touch months 7 through 12. You may just leave it the same based on the information you got. So that's my preference. That's what I like, is kind of a monthly cadence. There certainly needs to be review cycles around what's actually happening with your demand on a week to week basis. But from official plan perspective, kind of plan a record, I would say month to month.
Yeah, great input there from the standpoint where we're not precluding the fact that you may need to go in and begin looking at exceptions, meaning,
Sure.
hey, we planned a demand for 100 units and we're at 150 and we're 2 weeks into the period. It would necessitate a review. Okay.
Correct.
In this overall review, Tim, as and I've oftentimes looked at organizations that have difficulty coordinating these things, how much time would each of these entities, so I look at customer input, probably your account managers, product management, your NPI, new product introduction team, what type of an effort would be involved in somebody implementing a process where we get together consistently on a monthly basis to review a demand plan?
It's probably going to vary a little bit depending on the breadth of your business and product lines and product categories. But in general, I've seen it, demand plan could be generated in half a day, up towards a day. Now, if you're collecting a lot of customer input, maybe it's a week that you need, right? Maybe you need to gather the inputs from the, NPI team for new products. But you know, if you don't have like formal technology to do this, it may take a little longer, right? But if you are, recording your actual sales, and you've got a way to quickly analyze that against your forecast, and you're kind of on a cycle that says, hey, three days before the end of the month, we want to start our forecast cycle to have it ready, business day 2 to review, and then, another day or two for ops and supply chain to respond to that. That is not an unreasonable cadence if you have the right tool set. Now, if you've got to go pull a bunch of data and download it into Excel and manipulate that data, that could take a little bit longer. But with a really functional tool set, it shouldn't take but a couple days once you've defined what you're forecasting. I would say the upfront might take a little longer, but once you're into a rhythm and you have a set of data cadence that you want to monitor and reforecast, it shouldn't take a long time.
Great. And thank you for that input. I know as people are looking at pretty full schedules, the thought of allotting more time to this planning can be a little bit overwhelming. So appreciate your perspective. You brought up a real key component of that, which is technology and how it can assist. There are technologies that are available that will assist in creating a demand plan. And again, you looked at some of those key elements and all those different inputs. One of the things that we'd like to do now is share a little bit about a technology platform that can assist you in creating a demand plan. And Tim, I look forward to your comments and your feedback on as we're going through and evaluating a demand plan that's been generated by a system. So as I'm going through here, if you have comments, certainly feel free to interject on that. So Tim made a reference to history. History oftentimes can be a good predictor of future. It's not the only thing oftentimes that will predict the future, but the things that we can glean from history oftentimes are things like, do we have a seasonal profile associated with the products that we're selling? This is pretty common for a lot of our clients and a lot of the people that are in different industries. Seasonality is essentially looking at multiple years of history and trying to define where the peak demand periods are and the low periods, and are we consistent in those? This is showing that there's about 130% of demand during the first 3 quarters. It drops off during the next period, and then following that, we start seeing that moving into another peak. So by looking at history, by the way, in this chart, we're looking at an aggregation of historical sales. We can glean not only seasonality, we can look at trends on products. Obviously, when I'm looking at this, it looks like there's an overall downtrend in the overall peaks of this, but ascertaining what those are, evaluating the seasonality, and then lastly, incorporating that seasonality into a projection moving forward. I think as of note, in that last slide, we talked about a statistical forecast. A statistical forecast will include the seasonality and the overall trend. As we get into more of a collaborative process where we're interjecting with product marketing management, maybe it's looking at a customer forecast. If we're working with a customer base that provides us with input or account management, incorporating this into the mix is oftentimes quite helpful. You can see that this is quite drastically higher than what the history would tell us that the sales would be. Well, these meetings provide an opportunity for us to get in and dialogue around these things, what's going on with them. Other things that might be going on, promotions. So if we're talking with product marketing management, maybe I have a promotion that's out in the future. This gives us an opportunity to incorporate those so that they get included in the overall evaluation. Ultimately, this demand planning process, what we're looking at doing is arriving at a number that everybody is agreeing to. This is what we would call an operational forecast or consensus. And there might be a perfectly good case for us to say, you know what, we don't think the customer's demand, we think it's overstated based on what we've seen historically and the large deviation with where we're seeing historical, but we're going to increase and agree as a group to follow this line that is above what we're historically forecasting, but let's put that little bit of bump in there. Anything you'd like to comment on here, Tim? Any additional items?
No, I just think it's obviously it's very beneficial to have a view that you can look at these various inputs into your demand plan, and also just have a mechanism too to go in and make adjustments as needed, right? These statistical models are really good starting points. They don't always represent the future, and I think this is a really good view that you can look at your products and go, hey, how do I feel about this relative to where we've been, right? So I really like this view.
You bet. And just to note, one of the things that we wanted to talk about, oftentimes when you get into more of a collaborative process where we're getting into a formal, mature S&OP process, oftentimes what we start doing is pulling together not on those individual SKU or customer level forecast into groupings where we have the ability to say, let's aggregate a number of SKUs together. And as we're looking at this overall plan, does it make sense? So when we begin looking at this view, and by the way, we can incorporate a sales forecast for this grouping of products. Are we in concert? Meaning, are we all in alignment that this plan looks pretty reasonable? Anything else you'd like to comment on that one, Tim?
No, I just again, just another level of analysis on your business that can be really beneficial.
Okay. Great. So one of the things that we'd also like to talk about is the value. So Tim talks a lot about the financial component and what this does to assist us. If I go back over into this previous item that we were looking at over in here, one of the things that's derived from a forecast is we can generate a projection of our inventory positions. So now all of a sudden, input coming in from the sales team, from our operational team looking at that analysis, we now have a projection based on if we execute to that forecast and everything's aligned, we have obviously a plan that we're going to have to replenish the inventory on, but we can project our inventory position for each and every SKU. We can project it in on-hand units. We can look at it in days of supply and in balance. So this is a starting point for us to help to understand what the implications are going to be from a financial perspective. When we begin looking at those in aggregated roles, we have the ability then to begin looking at an inventory projection at a much higher level. So this is one of the nice things about a tool or technology that allows us to quickly take that demand plan and then convert it into the other components that are required. So one of the things that I have in here is a projected inventory position for potentially a hierarchy, one of those groupings, where I am looking at where my projected inventory balance is going to be out over time. And if I look at this, we can display it visually, we can display it in the charts up above, and we can also look at it here in groupings where we're saying, well, let's take a look at what our projected on-hand balance is. Again, this can be quite cumbersome or challenging if we're trying to do this, in spreadsheets. It can be done, but one of the nice things about technology is we can take those base level plans, begin rolling them up, and showing that projected. So all of a sudden, we now have a picture of a requirement from an inventory perspective for this product line. Anything you'd like to add to that one, Tim?
Yeah, I think it's really I think as you go through your demand planning, and now you're trying to plan your supply and you're trying to understand the impact on your business, especially if you're trying to make what I would call more strategic decisions around how to position a new product, as an example, right, with inventory. These types of quick feedback where you can go in, change the forecast, and then immediately see the impact on your cash flow, the inventory, is really beneficial, right? You can make decisions on the spot to either, modify, change, adjust, and it just gives you really good business insight around how to manage some of those more strategic decisions you might have to make.
You bet. Thank you, Tim. I know we're getting short here on time, but some of the other outputs from that demand plan is we can begin understanding what impact this is going to have on our operations. So for instance, as we talked about operations, do we have the capacity available for meeting these demand plans moving into the future? So one of the things that we have the ability to do here is begin rolling them up and begin looking at the plan or the load that's being placed on either our external or internal. So that demand plan is really instrumental in a lot of different ways. Getting it right from the very start is going to be a really key element for moving forward. So with that being said, Tim, I think what we'd like to do here is let's get into our key takeaways and share with folks what you feel are most important as they begin this journey.
Prioritize your planning process, right? Even if you don't do it that well to start, guarantee over time as you get better and do it repeatedly, you're going to feel much more comfortable about understanding the risk in your business and hopefully minimize that surprise or the firefighting that you may be doing on a day-to-day basis. I always want to make sure that demand, your supply, and the financials are integrated, right? In other words, you don't have an operational plan that's based on a different demand plan, and you don't have a financial plan that's based on a different, supply plan or demand plan, right? And then, using technology to rinse and repeat this process, right? Create a process cadence, right? We know the second workday we're going to be doing a SIOP meeting, we're going to be reviewing demand and our operational plans, and kind of make it the GPS for your business in a place that you can discuss issues, make strategic decisions, and also kind of get an update on the status of where you're at in your business. So those are the key takeaways I would have for the audience today.
Excellent, Tim. And I really love the analogy to a GPS, which is where are we at, where were we planning on going, and have we deviated from our course?
You bet.
So thank you so very much, Tim. This half an hour just flew by here.
It did.
Yeah, flew by. We just want to make sure that everybody who's attended and or registered and couldn't attend will be receiving the slides. This is a recording as well. But we do have upcoming sessions as well. So we're going to be continuing this journey down the overall planning process. And we're going to start talking about the path to supply chain resilience and then the holy grail of supply chain management. Also available, StockIQ does provide weekly demonstrations. We have a technology platform that will assist in this SIOP process. And also, StockIQ user conferences where we get together with our clients and we talk about these leading practices. We invite you to reach out to either myself and or Tim at Tight Lines Consulting. Here's our contact information. Tim, I just wanted to thank you so very much for sharing your years of insight and experience working in this industry. And I love the fact that you're combining the operations down to the finance and showing the value that a combined integration approach can mean to folks. So thank you. I appreciate that.
You betcha. Appreciate it.
All righty, everybody. Look for an update from us. Thank you for attending. We'll look forward to seeing you at our next session, which is going to be coming up here on Thursday, April 20th. Take care, folks.